Mark Thompson had been working as a night janitor at Riverside Elementary for only 3 weeks when he first heard the children laughing. It was 2:30 a.m., and the old brick school building should have been completely empty except for him pushing his mop cart through the dimly lit hallways. But there it was, the unmistakable sound of young children giggling and playing, echoing from somewhere deep within the building. At first, Mark convinced himself it was just his imagination, or maybe sounds from outside carrying through the old windows. But as nights passed, the sounds became more frequent and more disturbing. He would hear small footsteps running up and down the corridors, classroom doors creaking open and slamming shut, and worst of all, a little girl's voice singing nursery rhymes in room 23, a classroom that had been permanently locked off since 1975. Mark learned the school's dark history from Mrs. Henderson, the elderly secretary who had worked there for 30 years. In 1975, 7-year-old Amy Patterson had been murdered in room 23 by the previous janitor, Robert Mills. Mills had lured the little girl back into the school after hours, claiming she had forgotten something important. When her parents came looking for her the next morning, they found her tiny body stuffed inside the supply closet, strangled with a jump rope from the gymnasium. The killer janitor had hung himself in the school's basement boiler room before police could arrest him. His body was found dangling from the pipes, a confession note pinned to his shirt admitting to killing the pretty little girl with blonde pigtails. Room 23 was immediately sealed off, and no one had entered it since. But Mark began to suspect that Robert Mills was still in the building, still hunting for children in the afterlife. He started noticing that his cleaning supplies would be mysteriously moved or arranged in strange patterns. The janitor's closet keys would disappear, only to reappear hanging from the very pipes where Mills had killed himself. Most terrifying of all, Mark would sometimes find small, muddy footprints leading from room 23 to the basement, child-sized prints, followed by larger adult ones, as if someone was chasing a little girl through the halls. One night in November, Mark decided to investigate room 23. Using a master key he wasn't supposed to have, he unlocked the door and stepped into the abandoned classroom. Immediately, the temperature dropped by at least 20 degrees. Children's drawings still hung on the walls from 1975, and Amy Patterson's desk remained exactly as she had left it on her final day. Pencils arranged neatly, a half-finished math worksheet, and a small stuffed bunny she had brought for show and tell. As Mark stood in the doorway, he heard a small voice whisper, "Help me, he's coming." The voice came from inside the supply closet where Amy's body had been found. Mark approached slowly, his hand shaking as he reached for the closet door handle. The moment he touched it, the door burst open and he saw her. Little Amy Patterson, exactly as she had looked in 1975, her blonde pigtails tied with blue ribbons, her school dress torn and dirty. "He's still here," Amy whispered, pointing toward the basement. "He's waiting for more children. You have to stop him before school starts tomorrow." That's when Mark heard the heavy footsteps in the hallway outside, the shuffling gait of someone dragging a rope behind them. The footsteps stopped right outside room 23, and Mark could see a shadow under the door. The door handle began to turn slowly, and Mark realized that Robert Mills wasn't done killing. The dead janitor was still hunting, and tomorrow morning, hundreds of innocent children would be walking into his trap. Mark barricaded himself in the supply closet with Amy's ghost as the door opened and Robert Mills entered the classroom. The dead janitor looked exactly as he had when they found him, neck twisted at an unnatural angle, rope burns around his throat, his eyes bulging from their sockets. Mills began searching the room methodically, overturning desks and chairs, looking for fresh victims to add to his collection. The police found Mark's body the next morning, stuffed in the same supply closet where Amy Patterson had died 12 years earlier. He was strangled with the same jump rope that had killed the little girl. Pinned to his shirt was a note in Mills' handwriting, "2 down, more to come when the children return." Riverside Elementary was permanently closed after Mark's murder, but local residents say that on quiet nights, you can still hear children screaming and a man's voice calling, "Come here, little ones, I have something special to show you."
Don't forget to like and subscribe if you dare to hear more chilling stories.
The music room at Harmony High School had been sealed shut since 1987, but every student and teacher knew about the tragedy that had occurred there. During the annual spring concert rehearsal, the room's ceiling had collapsed without warning, killing 12 members of the school choir and their director, Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell. By 2001, the sealed music room had become the stuff of local legend. Students dared each other to approach the locked door, claiming you could hear piano music and singing voices coming from inside. The school administration had bricked up the windows and reinforced the door with multiple locks, but that didn't stop the stories from spreading about Mrs. Hartwell and her dead students still rehearsing for a concert they would never perform. 17-year-old Marcus Williams was the star of the school's drama program and had always been fascinated by the music room mystery. He had heard his grandmother talk about the tragedy. She had been a student at Harmony High in 1987 and remembered the day of the collapse. She told Marcus that Mrs. Hartwell had been acting strangely in the weeks before the accident, insisting that the choir practice late into the evening and become perfect for their performance. Marcus decided to investigate the room for his senior project on local history. He convinced the night security guard, Mr. Peterson, to let him examine the sealed door and take photographs for his research. What Marcus discovered would haunt him for the rest of his life. The door to the music room was covered with scratches and dents, as if someone had been clawing and pounding on it from the inside. The scratches formed words when viewed from the right angle: "Let us out," and "She won't stop," and, most chilling of all, "The music never ends." Marcus realized that the choir members hadn't died instantly in the collapse. They had been trapped alive, trying desperately to escape, while Mrs. Hartwell forced them to continue rehearsing. Using bolt cutters, Marcus broke the chains and entered the music room for the first time in 14 years. The scene inside was exactly as it had been left after the tragedy. Sheet music scattered across the floor, overturned chairs, and the piano bench still positioned as if Mrs. Hartwell had just stepped away. But most disturbing were the human-shaped impressions in the debris where the victims had been found, outlined in white chalk by investigators and never cleaned up. As Marcus examined the room with his flashlight, he began to hear it. The faint sound of a piano playing and voices singing in perfect harmony. The music seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere, filling the air with a hauntingly beautiful melody that made his skin crawl. He recognized the song as Ave Maria, the piece the choir had been rehearsing when they died. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically, and Marcus could see his breath in the air. 12 ghostly figures began to materialize around the room. The dead choir members, still wearing their concert attire from 1987, except for their eyes, which were black holes of despair and terror. At the front of the room, Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell's ghost appeared behind the piano, her hands moving across the keys even though no sound was coming from the broken instrument. She looked up at Marcus with a smile that was both beautiful and absolutely insane. "You're just in time for rehearsal," she said, in a voice that sounded like wind through broken glass. "We've been practicing for 14 years, and we're almost ready for our performance, but we need one more voice to make it perfect." The dead choir members began moving toward Marcus, their mouths open in silent song, reaching out with ghostly hands to pull him into their eternal rehearsal. Marcus realized that Mrs. Hartwell had become obsessed with achieving perfection and had driven her students to practice even after death, trapping their souls in an endless rehearsal for a concert that would never end.
Marcus ran for the door, but it slammed shut behind him with supernatural force. The singing grew louder and more desperate, and he could feel ghostly hands grabbing at his clothes, trying to pull him back to join their undead choir. Mrs. Hartwell's laughter echoed through the room as she played faster and faster, the phantom music becoming a cacophony of madness. Security found Marcus the next morning, unconscious on the floor outside the music room. His hair had turned completely white, and he was clutching a piece of sheet music that hadn't existed in 1987. Music with his name written at the top in Mrs. Hartwell's handwriting. Marcus never spoke again, but those who visited him in the psychiatric hospital claimed he would sometimes hum Ave Maria and move his lips as if singing along to music only he could hear. The music room at Harmony High School was finally demolished in 2002, but construction workers reported hearing piano music and children's voices singing as they tore down the walls. Local residents say that on quiet evenings, especially during spring concert season, you can still hear the phantom choir practicing their eternal rehearsal, forever trapped in Mrs. Hartwell's obsession with achieving the perfect performance.
Don't forget to like and subscribe if you dare to hear more chilling stories. Sarah always stayed late at Jefferson High. As student council president, she had keys to most of the building and often worked on projects until the janitors finished their rounds. But tonight felt different. The hallways seemed longer, the shadows deeper. She was organizing files in the main office when she heard it. The sound of lockers slamming shut, one after another, in perfect rhythm. Sarah froze. The janitors had left an hour ago, and she was supposed to be alone. Slam, slam, slam. Sarah grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. Strange, since she always had full bars in the office. The overhead fluorescents flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls covered with decades of student photos. She decided to investigate. After all, it was probably just the building settling, or maybe a window was open somewhere, causing doors to move. Sarah walked slowly toward the sound, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The slamming stopped. Now there was only silence, thick and suffocating. Even the usual hum of the vending machines had ceased. Sarah reached the west corridor and peered down its length. Every single locker door hung open, swaying slightly as if they'd just been slammed shut and were still settling. That's when she noticed the writing. Scratched into the metal doors of each locker were words carved deep enough to catch the dim emergency lighting. As she moved closer, she could make out the messages. Help us. Don't leave. Remember us. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone to use its flashlight. In the bright LED glow, she saw something that made her blood freeze. The scratches weren't random. They were in different handwriting styles, dozens of them, covering every visible surface. And they were fresh. She turned to run, but the hallway had changed. The corridor stretched impossibly long now, lined with classroom doors that hadn't been there before. Room numbers she didn't recognize, 237, 238, 239, but Jefferson High only had 2 floors, and no room numbers went higher than 205. From behind one of these impossible doors came the sound of a teacher lecturing, her voice monotone and endless. Behind another, the scratch of chalk on a blackboard that went on and on without pause. A third door leaked the sound of children crying, not the normal tears of elementary students, but something deeper, more desperate. Aisha ran toward what she hoped was the main entrance, but every corner she turned led to another corridor,
Another set of impossible rooms. The overhead announcements crackled to life. "Attention students, you are never dismissed. Class is always in session. Please take your seats." She found herself in the gymnasium, though she couldn't remember how she'd gotten there. The bleachers were full of students, hundreds of them, all in clothes from different eras. 1950s Letterman jackets sat next to 1980s punk rock attire, which sat next to modern hoodies. They were all staring at her with hollow, dark eyes. In unison, they began to chant, "Stay with us, Aisha. School never ends. School never ends. School never ends." The last thing Aisha remembered was the final bell ringing, not the familiar tone that marked the end of classes, but something deeper, more final. A bell that didn't signal freedom, but the beginning of an eternal lesson she would never escape. They found her car in the parking lot the next morning. Aisha was never seen again. But sometimes, late at night, janitors report hearing typing from the main office and seeing the glow of a computer screen long after everyone has gone home.
Don't forget to like and subscribe if you dare to hear more chilling stories. Hassan had always been a good student at Greenwood Academy, but something was terribly wrong with his new substitute teacher. Mrs. Blackwood had arrived on a Monday morning in October, replacing their beloved English teacher who had mysteriously disappeared over the weekend. She was tall and unnaturally thin, with pale skin that seemed to glow under the classroom's fluorescent lights. Her eyes were an unusual shade of gray, almost silver, and they never seemed to blink. When she smiled, which she did often, her teeth appeared too sharp, too white. "Class," she said, in a voice like silk over broken glass, "today we're going to learn about eternal literature, stories that never end." The first strange thing happened during attendance. When Mrs. Blackwood called out, "Jennifer Martinez," there was no response. Hassan looked around. Jennifer's seat was empty, but he could have sworn she'd been there just moments before when class started. "Jennifer Martinez?" Mrs. Blackwood repeated, her silver eyes scanning the room. She was just here," Hassan stammered. Mrs. Blackwood's smile widened. "Was she? How interesting. Sometimes students just fade away when they don't pay attention." By lunch, 3 more students had vanished from Hassan's class. Their desks remained, their backpacks still hanging on chairs, but the students themselves were gone. When Hassan asked other teachers about it, they looked at him blankly and insisted there had never been any students by those names. The next day, Hassan decided to record everything on his phone. He filmed Mrs. Blackwood as she taught, documenting each student in their seats. But when he played the video back during lunch, the footage showed an empty classroom with just Mrs. Blackwood talking to herself. "This is impossible," Hassan whispered, staring at his phone screen. During the next English class, Mrs. Blackwood announced they would be reading a story called The Garden of Forgotten Voices. She handed out books that Hassan had never seen before, old, leather-bound volumes that seemed warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. "Open to page 1 and begin reading aloud," Mrs. Blackwood instructed. "Take turns, starting with Maria Santos." Maria opened her book and began to read. Her voice sounded normal at first, but as she continued, it grew distant and hollow. Hassan watched in horror as Maria's edges began to blur, like she was dissolving into mist. Her voice became an echo, then a whisper, then nothing. Her desk was empty, her book lay open, its pages blank. "Wonderful reading, Maria," Mrs. Blackwood said pleasantly.
Next, let's have David Chen." Hassan's blood turned to ice. Half the class was gone now, but Mrs. Blackwood continued as if nothing had happened. The remaining students seemed hypnotized, their eyes glazed and distant as they waited their turn to read. "Actually," Hassan said, standing abruptly, "I need to use the bathroom." Mrs. Blackwood's silver eyes fixed on him. "Sit down, Hassan. It's almost your turn to read." "No," Hassan said, backing toward the door. "Something's wrong here. You're making students disappear." For the first time, Mrs. Blackwood's smile faltered. "Disappear? My dear boy, they're not disappearing. They're becoming part of the story. Forever. Isn't that what every student wants? To be part of something eternal?" Hassan reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't turn. The windows had become solid black, like painted glass. The classroom walls seemed to stretch higher, and the ceiling disappeared into darkness above. "You see," she continued, her form beginning to shift, "I collect voices. Each voice I take becomes part of an eternal tale." The remaining students turned to look at Hassan with empty, hollow eyes. When they opened their mouths, other voices came out, whispers and cries for help. "Don't worry, Hassan," she said, her appearance now more shadow than human. "Your voice will join the chorus. Now, please take your book and read." Hassan looked down. A leather-bound book had appeared in his hands, open to page 1. The words seemed to writhe on the page, and despite himself, he felt compelled to speak them aloud. But Hassan remembered something his real English teacher had taught them: the power of silence. He slammed the book shut. The classroom shuddered. Mrs. Blackwood shrieked, her form beginning to unravel like smoke. "You must read. The story must continue." "No," Hassan said firmly, "these stories deserve to end." He threw the book to the ground, where it burst into flames. With them, Mrs. Blackwood's power began to fade. Hassan woke up in the nurse's office. His real English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, was sitting beside him, concerned about his fainting spell during her normal literature class.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now, before the next nightmare finds you.